Hello and welcome to this screencast demo of Forena Reports. My name is David Metzler. I'm the module author. And today what I wanted to do is go over a really brief introduction of Forena Reports, how it works, and why you might use it. So let's get started. We'll assume for the purposes of this demo that you already have Forena Reports installed on your Drupal site via the normal module installation instructions. And let's start by making sure, before we get to a report, let's start by making sure Forena is configured properly. The very first thing you're going to need to specify is the report repository location. This is the place where Forena is going to store its report files. Unlike most Drupal modules, Forena stores its reports as text files on the file system rather than being stored in the database. The reason for this is twofold. One, we can easily copy these files and push them from site to site without having to provide export-import functionality. But the more important reason is that at the core, Forena Reports is just a report templating language in an extended XHTML syntax. So that means we can edit these files using a regular HTML text editor like Eclipse or Oxygen or something like that. Anything that edits HTML files. So more on that later. We're going to want to configure an input format. By default, Drupal will have filtered HTML as the default input format. It's important for Forena that we use a full HTML format, one that lets you output tables and other more complicated HTML, because this is really generally used as a layout tool. We'll skip the default report form, but let's just say that this is lets you attach common CSS files for styling. Okay. Moving on to document types, Forena has the ability to export reports, actually the actual reports in CSV. So it will take a report that's got an HTML table in it and then convert that to a CSV file or to an Excel file, or with the appropriately installed SVG PHP libraries, we can even generate graphs from that data. So we're going to go ahead and enable some of these. We'll be demoing those today. And we can also specify a default. So if you like, for all your reports, you want people to be able to export them to CSV, we can specify that down here. So we'll go ahead and save those configuration settings. And now we're ready to move on to getting some data into our reports. So for the purposes of this demo, we'll be creating a second connection to a Drupal database, but know that Forena can be used to connect to a wide variety of databases and data sources. We'll be reporting on Drupal, but you can use Forena to report on any kind of external relational database connection that we have driver support for. So to start with, I'm going to go ahead and specify the name of this data source. In this case, we're just going to call it custom SQL. This is going to specify the just a name that we'll see referenced in the Forena reports themselves. Let's get a nice visual name for that, and we'll just call this Drupal SQL. And this will be where we have our, this won't be used except for in error messages, but it's good to specify. And finally, we want to specify the location of where we're going to store our SQL files that are used to determine what data gets included in a report. For the purposes of this demo, we're going to store them in site's default SQL. You'll notice that I didn't put them in the files directory. I did this because we really don't want our SQL files, our code, to be modified by the web user. So we're going to be creating the SQL files using a text editor of some kind and not using a WYSIWYG editor. So keep these outside of a place that's not writable by your web user as a general rule. Well, we'll go ahead and hit save, but I will in just a second, but I will point out that Forena has support out of the box for Oracle database connectivity, any kind of PDO database, whether it be SQLite, MySQL, other kind of external data sources. Postgres native support for non-PDO Postgres, and Microsoft SQL Server. And you can also specify data sources as XML files instead. So we'll go ahead and save that. And now we have our custom SQL data repository that's going to use SQL files from the site's default SQL directory. Okay, now that we've got a data connection established to a database, the next thing we want to do is create some SQL that will be used as the source of data for a report. Most of my databases are in Postgres, so I'm going to use the pgadmin tool to create my SQL data files, but you could use phpMyAdmin, or you could use a text editor or Eclipse or whatever you'd like to create these files. So we'll go ahead and open up a window, and we'll go ahead and write our little SQL statement that says select star from system. This is how you might get a list of active modules, right? So the systems table tells you what modules are enabled in Drupal, and for this demo what we're going to do is we're going to create a report that shows you a list of the active modules used on your site. Okay, so but first we need to tell Forena about security, about who can access this data, and Forena extracts that from this access equals comment that is put at the top of the SQL file. So what we want to specify here is what Drupal right will be used for accessing this data. So in this case, anybody who has the access content Drupal privilege is going to be able to access the data that is returned by this select statement. So we're going to do select star from system. That's got too many columns back, so I don't necessarily want to expose all this data, so I'm going to put in a column list, the module name, perhaps the schema version as well, and maybe the weight. So let's see that. But I don't want all modules. I really just want the modules that are enabled. So I want to add a where clause to say where status equal 1. And I don't want modules, not themes. So I'll add type equal module to that. And that should give us, status, couldn't spell status there. Great. So that should give us a list of the modules that are enabled, but it's not in a good order, so we want to make sure we specify an order by clause here. So I'm going to order by name. There we go. That looks good. So I'll go ahead and save this. Now the place that I want to save this to is going to be into my Drupal site. It's the data repository, the one that I created earlier. So I said this was in the Drupal 7 sites default, and then I said it was going to be in the SQL directory inside this, and that directory doesn't exist yet, so I need to create it. So there we go. Now we're going to save this as active modules in that directory. Doing so, we've created a very simple .sql file that lives in site's default active modules. So now that we've got our data source defined, the next we're going to jump back into Forena and create a report. So I'll click on the Create Report link. This needs to have a name. In this case, I'm just going to give it a name of Active Modules, just like the name of my SQL file. The title is how the user is going to see it, so we want to see this as Active Modules. And the category can be anything that you want to use to group these like-minded reports. I'm going to put it in the Site Info category, and I'll go ahead and create that report. So having done that, this creates the Forena report template file in that report directory. More on that later. But now we need to add some data to it. So I'll click on the Add Data link, and now I'm specifying the data block that I want to add to that report. So in this case, we created one called Active Modules, and I can see that in my custom SQL data repository. So that's how it gets the data is defined by the data connection, and then this SQL file is going to get used for generating the report. If we hit preview, you can see that we get a list of the schema versions and the weight and the name of the module. So that looks good to me, so I'm going to go ahead and add that to the report. We can add more than one data block to a report, so you might have a summary table at the top followed by another piece of data below that, and we'll get more on the details later. So having done that, we should be able to view this report, and sure enough, we've got a web report, and it's just that quick. So Forena comes with a bunch of different sample reports that really illustrate the common patterns that we use for creating web reports. What we just did was create something that's kind of like this simple table of states, where it's just a list of the states that are in this particular database. So you'll notice that we have this active modules report that I just created, and that has the list of modules in it. You might have noticed this CSV link. The CSV link is that export to CSV, so it's going to take whatever's in the table here and convert that into a CSV file that can be exported into a program like Numbers or something like that. So that's out of the box. You don't have to do anything to make that happen. Okay, so back to the sample reports. One of the real common things is that people in the report writing world are used to doing is reports based on parameters. So here's an example of a report. You can see that Forena allows you to add parameters to reports. These parameters are, I'll show you what they look like in the SQL files, but they're just colon-based parameters, just like you'd see in a Drupal 7 query. So it's really easy to define them. And so we're seeing an example of a report that lets you pick which state you're reporting on and then take a look at the users of that state. Another more interesting report is to provide linked reports with drill downs. And this is a really common pattern that we use for making reports. You'll see an example of an SVG graph that's embedded in this particular report that we can certainly use with the appropriate tools. But any of the data links associated with this what we do is we create more than one report, and we link those reports together via these links. So you'll see in this case this list of states with the total number of users in each state is generated by a group by query, and we display that as the first report, and then we provide a link in this report to the detail that's that same report that we just looked at, that was the report that filters based on state lookup. So we can either have people come in and select that with a parameter, or we can provide links via these other summary reports. And this is a really common way that I use Forena to do enterprise reporting. Finally, I wanted to draw your attention to an example of a master detail report with nested blocks. So what this is something that views can't do real easily. So here we are listing all of the states with some header data associated with it, followed immediately by a table. And so each state then so the one list of states query is just a select star from the states, and then the details are executed for each state that it finds within that. So this is a really nice master detail reporting example. So as I said before, Forena reports are are basically SQL files and XHTML files that make up the report. So let's take a look a little bit with Eclipse at an example of these kinds of reports. So here is the state breakdown, which is the example of the master detail reports. But as you can see, if you look at your Sites All Modules folder and you go down into Forena, you can see examples of the data connections for all of these things. And we can take a look at the sample SQL files. So here's users by state. The users by state query is a nice example of a group by expression that summarizes in really quick SQL how many users are in each state. We can also look at the distribution report, which takes an input parameter. So in this case, we're selecting star from a table called user distribution. And you'll notice this colon state parameter that matches whatever comes in as a report parameter, either from the URL for the base report or in the master detail report from that perspective. So there's sample SQL files that you can take a look at that give you a flavor for how to create data blocks for use in Forena reporting. So as I said before, we provide the WYSIWYG editor functionality so that people can create the 80% of the reports really quickly. But one of the things that we want to look at is if we look at site default files reports, which is where we said we were going to store where our report repository was, and so that's where the FRX files, the Forena report files themselves get created. We can see that in there are if we look in here and we hit refresh, we'll see our active modules FRX report. So this is the corresponding XHTML that got created for this report. In a tool like Eclipse, I can reformat that and make it look a little prettier. Basically, you'll see that this FRX block tag references the SQL file that's going to be used as the data source, and then this FRX for each file, for each equal star line, is basically having it repeat that TR row for every record that it finds in that particular SQL file. And then finally, we saw these tokens which indicate the column names that are replaced as we render each one of these things. So you can see that you can create really any kind of HTML report with this. If you go in and want to hack out some different XHTML, the for each can be assigned to any tag. It doesn't matter what it is. So you could envision having this be a UL tag with FRX block equals to say where the list is getting its data, and then an FRX for each equals star assigned to an LI tag or a list item tag to repeat a list item with that. The sky's the limit in terms of what kind of XHTML you can produce in Forena reports. So as you'll see, there's other sample reports. All the sample reports are delivered there, so you can take a look at these and take a look at them as examples, and go from there. So that's kind of it. We've seen what Forena can do. I'll just quickly say that I've used this tool for enterprise reporting on a wide variety of platforms, and one of the cool things about this tool is that you can be really quick. Somebody comes into you, if you know the SQL to get at the data out of a system, whether it's Drupal or Moodle or some other enterprise system, you write the SQL, you just create reports, and you can create reports very, very quickly. And we've reduced our report writing time. Typically in a development shop, we might take a week to write a report that we can now write in just an hour, even as the data gets really complex. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for your time. I'll be doing more screencasts to try and get at more of the details, but hopefully this will give you a good idea of what Forena can be used for. Thanks for listening.